Continuing our series in Christian neighboring. Today is probably the last time we talk about service, but we'll see, because I think I said that a few times. So far, let me do a quick review of what we talked about so far with service. Here we go. Let's see. So super fast review on what we've talked about with service. We've talked about what is it? It's lowering yourself and meeting needs. Why do we serve? We talked about because Jesus did. When feet were dirty, he washed them. When people were hungry, he fed them. Service is not that complicated. It does not have to be a 15-step program with a board of so-and-so. It can for large-scale stuff, right? But most service is see a need, meet a need on a personal one-on-one level. We also serve because Jesus first loved us. It's a pretty basic understanding of our reasoning. We also serve so that we can love like Jesus loved. People see us differently when our motivations to serve are not self-centered. We have mentioned the phrase before that love is as love does, which is similar to James 2:26 that says faith without works is dead. I would say that love without works is dead. Service is an outworking of love, and we spent time talking about that. Most recently, we talked about how do we serve. What does that look like with your personality and your chronic conditions or family situations or your health or your mental health or whatever that is? What does it look like for you? What it looks like for Amber is different than what it looks like for Nat, than what it looks like for Danny, than what it looks like for Josephine. God doesn't hold me to Addie's standard. He doesn't hold Addie to Whitney's standard. Okay? We talked a whole lot about that last week, and that was very personally liberating for me to study. So now, and then we talked about how do we identify service opportunities. We talked about cultivating empathy. We had that class I guess it wasn't a long time ago. Everything feels like a long time ago. We talked about empathy, that one class. We watched that video by Brene Brown that explained like appropriate empathy. So in order to identify service opportunities, we discussed that you need to cultivate empathy in order to really connect with someone during their need, but you also first need to cultivate awareness. How do you even know about their needs? And so 2 weeks ago, we talked about that ought to feeling. When you walk by a need or someone, you've got the, I should do this thing, but I don't want to because we've got a nap time. Or I don't want to because I just don't want to. Or whatever it is. Or I don't want to because I'm on my way to church. Or whatever it is. About how maybe we shouldn't ignore those ought to feelings. Those gut feelings are from God, convicting us to help someone. So now we're going to talk about today, reciprocal service. And I'm recovering from something terrible, so I will be coughing quite a bit. I went to lectureship with this something terrible and almost died. I'm barely here today. I'm a ghost of myself. So, reciprocal service. We briefly started talking about this a couple weeks ago, but today we're going to spend more time on it. And then when we're done talking about this, I think we'll be done talking about service. So we've talked a whole lot about how do I serve my neighbor? How does Amber serve her neighbor Curtis? We'll use Mr. Curtis across the hall. How do I serve this guy? He's a single dad from Hawaii with 3 kids. I know that 2 of his kids are homeschooled, or one of them is. I know that they don't have a mother. And and these are all the things that I have become aware of and noticed by people watching. That's holy, right? People watching. If it leads to service, it's not creepy. So I have been able to overhear phone conversations, living in a fourplex. We hear everything. And I've been able to see, to infer things. Don't just glance at a screaming kid, or don't just really sit and think about the interactions you see with your neighbors. Because as we've discussed, like what's her face, Rosaria Butterfield said in her book, The Gospel Comes with a House Key, God does not get the address wrong. You're meant to remember. So you really sit and you think, what is God trying to show me with my neighbors? What needs can I meet? But also, what needs can my neighbors meet for me? Because reciprocal service, reciprocal being a going both ways relationship, I give, they give, is also extremely important. It's flipping service around. How can your neighbors serve you or serve with you? Acknowledge your own needs. What are your needs? What do you need? And start noticing the people in your neighborhood or your fourplex who might be willing to help. God has given them gifts just like he's given you gifts. Christians, so like Mike said, however long ago, there's no such thing as ungifted Christians. All Christians are gifted. And those gifts are also things received of the Holy Spirit, right? Fruit of the Holy Spirit. But also, I think people who aren't Christians have like dormant qualities that would be enhanced when they became Christians. Does that make sense? Do you ever see someone you think, you'd be such a good Christian? Like, if you were just, like, oh, you'd be so good. And so that's like a thing. And your neighbors have those qualities in them too. And so look at them and see, in what ways can God use them for service? The same way that we look at our children. I look at Patsy and I say, whatever ways God's going to use her, it's going to be with people. I think it's going to be in front of people. I think it's going to be something that requires a face and boldness. And I think that's how God's going to use her. TBD on Rosemary. No idea. I don't know enough about her yet, honestly. She's not even 2. Still getting to know my own child. But I can definitely see in my own children, like, ways that God will use them. We'll see that in your neighbors, too. See that that's a whole lesson on what do you see in your spouse? What do you see in your sister? Your real sister, or your church sister, whatever. But anyways, I want to take this concept and apply it to your neighbor. God has given them gifts and predispositions and proclivities towards abilities and things and behaviors that can be used. Let people serve you as a way to introduce them to Christ. Jesus let a woman wash his feet. He let someone serve him as a way to draw her near. Letting your neighbor serve you is a way to draw them near. Your neighbors are created by God, so they have inherent value, worth, and dignity. They're also wired to love. We're all wired this way, whether or not we accept it and follow a path that embraces it by following Christ. We are wired to love. We see this in a lot of secular groups that serve. You think of a lot of nonprofits that don't have any sort of theological foundation. They do it because it's the right thing to do, right? Because it's good. It's good to help people. You remember the Random Acts of Kindness movement that was super popular however long ago? They encouraged it in schools. We saw it in a lot of Starbucks lines. Random Acts of Kindness was paying for the $7 latte behind you kind of thing. And people felt good doing that. People want to do that. People want to help other people, if not just for the reward it gives them personally. Is there something, take a second and just think about your neighbors. Are there things that you're like, they're really good at this? Or I see that they have the ability to that. Like, is there someone at church you normally call to help you with your car? Right? I got like 5 people in my head right now. Is that something you could go next door and ask a neighbor to do? And I know that might feel weird. It might be like, no, I'm talking to my neighbors. It's easier for me to text the Delphs or whoever else does everything. That would be easier and less confrontational, but could you make a connection with your neighbor by saying, hey, I really need to get this yard work done. I've noticed that you seem to be outside a lot. Could you show me how to do this? Another great way, I was speaking with someone recently who's having a hard time connecting to her church community, and this suggestion was made to me years ago that I have found to be helpful, is just ask people to ask them what their hobbies are. For instance, Sierra, let's say Sierra loves sewing, and I want to get to know Sierra. And so I say, Sierra, I know nothing about sewing, but I think it's so interesting. Could you show me sometime what you're working on and how you got into it? Sierra would love to share that with me and talk to me about that. And I want to take that concept and apply it to my neighbors. What is something I see my neighbors doing, or they're good at, or they're interested in, that I can learn more about from them as a way to connect with them? And it's especially important if it's something where they can serve you. They need that. They are wired to help other people, just like you're wired to help other people. Sometimes service is an avenue. So service is an avenue into hospitality, which we're going to be talking more about hospitality in the future. But service builds trust. And I think that's why Jesus chose to serve, because he did not have to come down as a servant. He could have just ruled, and we all would have been like, that makes sense, right? But he came down and he served. And I think that was to foundationally build relationships and trust that can be grown and built upon. And I think that model is applicable to being a neighbor. I'm way more likely to go over to someone's house that wants to have a meal with me once we've connected through service. That's created trust. It's at least created something we can talk about at the dinner table, right? Like, remember that time we raked your lawn, Amber, and then you fell and you busted your knee open? It was so funny. Or whatever it is. Like, it creates shared experience and trust. Service can lead, I'm not saying that happened. Service to others can lead to relationships, but not always. And that's okay, because you serve anyways. You love your neighbors, even if they never accept Jesus, which I grew up in a church culture that was a little bit more like, well, that didn't work, move on to the next one. Or they're rejecting church, they didn't accept your invite, let's keep moving. But I think that was short-sighted. Your neighbors are not your projects, they are people. Your neighbors do not need to be your pet project. They need to be your friend. Your relationship with them does not live or die on whether or not they devote their life to Christ while you know them. You have no idea what God is doing in their life, and you don't know if the way that you love and serve someone is preparing the soil for someone else later. You are not the complete full picture of their Christian life as much as you want to be. I grew up thinking if I do not introduce them to God, teach them about God, baptize them, and make sure they stick with it, there's no point. That was a very short-sighted way to view that, and I don't even necessarily think that's a common way to view it, but that's how I saw it. And so if someone seemed iffy on accepting my invitation, whether it's literally to church or just invitation to talk more about faith, I just dropped them. I was like, not worth my time, right? They said no. Well, no, because as I've learned in my own life, in my own faith, the entirety of my faith did not exist in like a 3-month decision. I'm still going through it, right? Like my faith has gone like this thus far. And I've had people that stuck with me in the dips to prepare me for the people that would meet me in the highs, if that makes sense. In high school, first, think back to people in your life that have done something for you, and that it greatly affects you now. And maybe this is a neighbor, or maybe it's not. This is a concept I want to explore that we can apply to our neighbors, but it's beyond that, maybe in your reference point. Can you remember something someone did for you as a child, or something someone did for your parents? Some lady at church that used to habitually do this thing, or whatever it was, that you remember to this day and remember fondly. So in high school, I was beginning my walk down the diving board to jump off into the deep end. I was about to spiral, and it started with a boyfriend who was not a good fit and not a great influence. He was also a child, because we were both children, so he's not a villain, but he wasn't encouraging me to make good choices, to say the least. I remember a girl at church. She was in her 20s. I don't know how old she was. Her name's Lydia. She invited me and a few other girls from high school out to the park and to get frozen yogurt and walk around the mall and chat. That was it. That was all. She just said, you know what? I have a license. That was a commodity enough. And she picked us up and we went and just hung out. And all she did was share her life. No agendas, no, if they don't answer these questions appropriately, I drop them, or whatever. She just shared her life with us. And she has no idea to this day how much that changed my life. That Christian influence, someone who I was not in a good place spiritually. Like, I was making terrible choices. I was openly living my life contrary to Christ, and it was just not a good time. And it didn't matter all my reasons for it. I would say I had a good list of reasons for living the way I was living. And even now in retrospect, you might think, if I listed out all the ways I was living, you might say, oh, that's not a big deal. You know, you were just 17. But it was a big deal because it was setting me on a trajectory. And she saw that, or maybe she didn't see that. All she said was, I don't really know them and I want to connect with them, so we're just going to share some life together. And I saw someone who was loving Christ as an adult outside of her home context and who was thriving. And she gave me perspective for once I get out of this, that could await me if I make these same choices. Is this making sense what I'm saying? I don't want to get too much into weeds and specifics because that didn't matter. The point was she showed me where I could go if I kept choosing Christ instead of where I was headed. And she has no idea to this day. I remember all of that time together and how wonderful it was and how much fun it was. And there was no guilt attached to any of the fun, which I wasn't used to at that time. And it was lovely. And all she did was share her life with me. These small moments of kindness, no matter how they are received in the moment with your neighbors, can make an eternal difference. You might never see the fruit, but you are participating in the cultivation of a Christian. These are small nudges, small gestures of love in their life. You might get a thank you, maybe, or they might slander you for no reason. Jesus served people that hated him. You have to remember, he washed Judas's feet too, and he knew what Judas was going to do. So your relationship with your neighbors is not contingent on if they accept your bid to go to church or accept whatever faith you're trying to share with them. You are still to be a good neighbor and to serve them, no matter how they receive it. Now, there is the concept of how much time you devote. If you have one neighbor that is much more receptive to what you're trying to share with them, I might, and I say this hesitantly, each situation is different. You might prioritize that meetup over the one with the neighbor who's like, I'm good, right? But do you completely drop the neighbor that's disinterested? No, because you're still committed to love your neighbors. What thoughts are you having right now as I've said a lot of things. I probably took 2 breaths. What are you thinking? Is there someone that comes to mind, a neighbor that served you really well? Or a neighbor that you could pull into service? Yeah.
We have a neighbor she's nasty. I mean, she's nasty. If our dogs get out and go in her property, she pulls out her gun.
Oh my.
And shoots at them. She's nasty. And my first meeting with her was before I moved in with my family. So, and when I moved in with my family, there was one time we were stuck, and he come and he pulled us out and got us unstuck. And I was grateful, but when I got in the house, I said, I can't believe he did that. They're so nasty. I was grateful to him. I said thank you to him, but I didn't. I told my dad, I was like, I can't believe he did that. And Dad's like, he's not a bad person. And I'm like, his wife is, he goes, but you can't judge him. I had to be reminded, and I feel bad. And you just brought that back. You can't judge the whole family by one person in the family. I mean, she still is nasty to this day. But every time I see him, I wave at him. And I try to wave at her. She's so nasty, but he's not. And it's really hard. So I don't know how I would reach her. But I think, with just giving him a smile, he smiles back. And he's come and helped us get out of ditches before and come and help unblock our driveway when they snowplow. I mean, the other day she pulled the gun out on her dog again, and it just bothers me so bad, and I don't know how to reach them because he's so entwined with her.
Sure.
Because they're together. I don't know how to be that good Christian because she scares me.
Sure.
And she scares me. I don't know what to do. Anybody got any suggestions on how to reach her? I mean, you start hitting my dogs. I mean, that just, because it means, what do you need to do when I go on your property? You're going to threaten my dogs when they go on your property.
So something we talked about before is praying for your neighbors.
Right.
That is not a passive intervention. That's a very active intervention on your neighbor's spiritual behalf. If you don't feel safe being around her, it is safe to pray for her, and you don't even have to get her permission to do that. She probably won't pull a gun on you. I would pray for your neighbors and then pray for safe opportunities to witness to her husband and to her. I would not throw your body in front of a gun at this time. But, I mean, it definitely sounds volatile and complicated. And that's how a lot of neighboring relationships can be, especially if you have history. Right, Whitney? Right? Yeah. I shared when Whitney was not here one day. That was fun. About Whitney's power washing problem with her neighbor. And I think I misrepresented Logan. It's not yours. It's Logan's. It's Logan's. But it's silly, like Whitney's example of a past tension. Can you say it? Can you tell it? Because I think I misrepresented Logan's character when I did it.
We have 3 kids.
Can you project?
The stuff that we need to get done that we can't get done within a week has to happen after 7. So he was pressure washing our porch, and it was probably 9, but it was 9 in July. So it was like the sun was out.
Mhm.
And she texted him and asked him if he didn't mind. Well, it wasn't quite that nice. He was like, "Can you turn that off?" And my sweet husband said no. So ever since then, there's been a little. We've had a couple other. Our dogs bark at each other through the fence.
Mhm.
It's just a different phase of life.
Yeah, yeah.
She's a retired single lady, and we are allowed.
Yeah.
So
That's tough to navigate.
she does.
She waves at you.
Yeah.
I would take that and run with it, you know? Like, but it's examples like that, like, it's funny and silly, but it's also a barrier, you know? Like, what do I do? Like, I don't know I feel like Logan walks around unbothered all the time. You know, I don't know if he gets like this, oh, she's over there, I have to crawl behind my car. Or if Logan's like, hello, when he walks by her. But, like, it would be an existing, Logan has never done that. Never. But you know what I mean? Like, that would be an existing tension, you know, and it is a barrier to neighboring, and it's not even all your fault, you know what I mean? And a lot of it isn't. It's a difference in lifestyle, and so how do you connect with that person? In the book, it's not Gospel Comes with a House Key. I think it's The Art of Neighboring. It's that yellow book I held up at the beginning of class. It talks about, like the beginning of classes, it talks about how this guy had an existing conflict with his neighbor. I think it was over a dog. And it seems small, but it becomes big when it's next door every day. And talking about how do I navigate this? And I don't want to spoil it, but in the end, the conflict is not resolved, but the neighbor's attitude changes. The Christian neighbor's attitude towards this thing over here changes, and it softens their heart. It didn't fix the thing, but they changed their perspective, which doesn't necessarily exactly apply to your situation. But there's a lot of, okay, family, how are we gonna, I loved Robert's, at the lectureship when he talked about families huddling up before they go to like Walmart and they pray. Was anyone at lectureship when they heard Robert's parenting seminar? It was so good. And I immediately texted him and told him to do a workshop. But talking about, like, get your family in on it. Like, huddle up and say, okay, kids, Miss What's-Her-Face next door. How can we serve her? What's something nice we can do for her? And use your kids. I use my kids all the time. Because people love kids, even if they're mad at me, right? Yes. And you guys can use my kids. I can drop Patsy off with you. If you need her help connecting with you, no, Patsy will go meet him. So, and Rosemary probably will too. Who knows yet? But anyways, yes, ma'am.
I was going to say that sometimes the tension makes you feel like there's not opportunities there, but there are.
They're there.
And look for those opportunities, because when we first moved into our property, our neighbors up on the hill, Emily, they actually let Emily park up there this year, but the very first thing they did when he come down there, he came down by himself and introduced himself, and he says, oh, by the way, that kayak dock down there where that your stuff is, he says, that's not your property, that's part of mine. My name's Dawn. And then went on to, about himself and everything. It was like, he said, well, I knew the other people, so we let them use it. He said, I probably won't have an issue with you guys using it either. It was really weird, But 2 weeks later, we baked some good goodies, took up there to him and went and visited. And both of us you know, met her and visited with her,
Mhm.
you know, and we try to do, you know, we try to take them hunting every year.
Yeah.
Just, we try to do things that, I don't know, because there are tensions.
But you initiate.
But you've got to initiate to
Yeah.
kind of break that barrier. Because now I'm sure there's things that I'm sure they don't like all the junk around their house with everything we're redoing. Because he's a neat freak. But, you know, we don't have conflict
Yeah.
just because of that. You know, we can talk to each other.
Exactly, you have an open, it's just like any other relationship, your conflict can live in the open. No, it's not there. Every single relationship is going to have conflict.
If you're expecting a relationship to not have conflict, you're not going to have any relationship. And so your neighboring, and that's what happens when you go past the hello relationship with your neighbor and walk in your house, which I've had for a long time. When you get to know them, you're getting to know a person who's going to have stuff instead of your stuff. I'm not going to butt heads. And so you have to be willing. You could even say the words, I care enough about our friendship to sit and talk about this with you. And I want to work on this and solve this. Because we're still going to be neighbors tomorrow. Just like you do in a marriage, you know. And so I love that you talked about initiating, because my husband tells me all the time, like, something will happen and I'll become closed off or standoffish. And he'll be like, stop taking it personally. Okay? Like, and only Jeffrey can say that to me, so watch him. But just kidding, you should say that too. But I think we tend to take things a lot more personally than they're meant to be. Like your neighbor talking about the stuff on the dock. That's not a you thing, that's a him and his dog thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, but it's easy to be like, why is he saying that about me? What have we done to him? It's like, it's not about you. I think that with my patients all the time, because some patients are awesome at the I'm a nurse at the hospital, if you don't know that. Some patients are really awesome and polite, and some patients are having the worst day of their life. Makes sense? And they're not very nice about it sometimes. And I have to remind myself, there's no way this can be personal. They just met me 15 minutes ago, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's the same with your neighbors to a certain extent. But I love that idea of initiating. It's 1:30, and so I won't keep you too long. But anyways, next week, I'm going to be in Nikiski. Jeffrey's preaching in Nikiski, that's why. And we are going to move into a discussion about hospitality. And Addie's going to be taking over some hospitality classes and teaching us for a while on that. And I am really looking forward to that. She's been doing some reading on hospitality herself and is very passionate about it, both in her study and her personal life. And so I'm so excited to learn from her about that. I think I accidentally deleted the end of my notes, so whoops. But I'm really looking forward to being able to be in here and listen about that. I will listen online next week and then catch up with you guys the next week. But anyways, look for moments. Look at your neighbors this week and think, how can I serve them and how can they serve me? And invite them into your lives. Okay. All right, y'all have a good day.
Wait, before we break, can I just make one quick announcement?
Yes.
So, years ago when I came to the church, I was pregnant, and the church put on a baby shower for me before I knew anybody. And then I got into baby showers because it was such a blessing. And then when we moved, the whole church moved us in 4 hours, and I was in awe, and so I started to get into the moving committee. And then when I had my second baby, they brought me meal deliveries. I didn't know this was a thing. And so I started doing meal deliveries because it was so transformational. And so I've been doing it for some years, and I have been having it on my heart that's kind of selfish because this could be a service for somebody else. I imagine that there's somebody in here who's had this type of service and it's been a blessing to them. So if it's on your heart that you would like to serve as a meal delivery coordinator, we don't have any official titles here, but it just helps with coordination because they have one point of contact. Please let me know if you're interested in doing that. Thank you.
That sounds great. Thank you. So if you're interested in helping to coordinate with that, please get with her and don't be shy.